Hi guys, it's Lucy. Today I wanted to introduce you to a new favorite author, and her name is Lucia Berlin. So this is a short stories collection that I picked up by Berlin, and I became introduced to this author through Lydia Davis. I was actually looking up collections of short stories by Davis, and this came up in the recommended, and I went for it, and it was one of the best finds of the year so far. So I marked a lot of little short blips of things that really stuck out at me, and I only started doing this as I was halfway into the book, and I was thinking each time that I came across something amazing that I didn't want to stop. So that's why I only have blips from the second half. These stories are super short, and just by way of introduction, so Berlin was born in 1936, and she passed away in 2004. Her experience is quite dotted. She has a very checkered past, or what I would call a checkered past. So her actual writing, like, she was active in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and her stories are, I'm just going to quote here, inspired by early childhood in Western mining towns. And also, very opposite side, she had some glamorous teenage years in Santiago in Chile. Like, we're talking about servants and high society and parties all day, all night, that type of life. And in her adulthood, 3 failed marriages, 4 sons, and a lifelong problem with alcoholism. All of these parts of her personal history are dotted and in her stories and sort of twisted. So none of them, this is not really autobiographical, but she draws a lot on her own life, growing up and also working many different types of jobs. She was working mostly in New Mexico, in Boulder. She ended up being a professor at the University of Colorado, and then in her later years she moved to California. And throughout her working life, she was like a cleaning lady, so obviously the title, a manual for cleaning women. So she worked as a cleaning lady, she worked as an emergency room nurse, she worked as a teacher, many other odd jobs as well. So definitely a writer on the fringes of literary society. This is not a woman who was at the I don't know, cafes or clubs or whatever, really famous, wherever really famous writers congregate in the big cities of the US or Europe, but she had been living her life, packing up, moving many different times, and writing on the side almost. But her writing is really punchy. She's very clever, she's extremely observant, and it's very witty. And when I say punchy, like, she does it in such a creative way, in very few words, that it kind of hits you unawares, even for someone who, I've read fiction, and it's refreshing. So I'm just going to stop here and then blow you away with some examples. In all of these very short stories, there's so much truth in everything she's a very human writer, and at the risk of sounding a bit weird when I say it like that. So from the last story, she says, all is suspect, a trick to lull us, rock us back into the placid relentlessness of time. And that reminded me of Hemingway, and then she goes on to talk about terminal illnesses, and what she thinks about that. So that was an interesting sort of serious story here. And then in another story, this protagonist is a writer, and so she says, I think every teacher sees this sometimes. It's not simply intelligence or talent, it's a nobility of spirit, a quality which could make him great at whatever he wanted to do. And then the punchy part, so she said the sentence starts like, then there is an earthquake, period. The end, period. And that's the end of the paragraph. It's very stop and go, And then in another story, which is kind of funny, she says, I am deeply grateful for my life today, period. And then the next paragraph starts. So God forgive me if I confess that once in a while I get a diabolical urge to, well, mess it up. So that then she talks about Officer Wong, who anyway, so it's funny. It's a funny one. And in another one, which is weirdly reverse feminist, she says, and this is one where she's working. The protagonist is working as an emergency room nurse. She has that hopeless look you see on battered women. God forgive me, because I am a woman too. But when I see women with that look, I want to slap them. I mean, these days, I don't think none of us would expect writing like that, just because we're overly politically correct, but it's very powerful. And she has very weird thoughts, very creative things, so something like this. Our mother wondered what chairs would look like if our knees bent the other way. What if Christ had been electrocuted? Instead of crosses on chains, everybody'd be running around wearing chairs around their necks. Who thinks like this, right? And then another one, he says, ... I'm reading Jane Austen. Her writing is like chamber music, but it's real and funny at the same time. And it's weird because that's exactly how I feel reading Lucia Berlin's stories, that it's funny and real at the same time. Another one, she's describing a character. She says, I like him because he never says things just because they are the right thing to say. And another one, also very creative. She's describing a car. It was very tall and short, like a car in a cartoon that had run into a wall. A car with its hair standing on end. So these are the short blips that I'm sharing from A Manual for Cleaning Women. And this is a book that has won one of the 10 best book reviews of the year for New York Times. I don't know which year, but this is a stamp that personally I look for when I select books to read myself. A lot of raving reviews at the end. I highly recommend checking out this author. I think there are a couple of other collections, but this is the sort of headliner collection that started off the series of other stories published separately in subsequent volumes. The other update that I wanted to insert in this video is on Caste, which is the new second book by Isabel Wilkerson. A lot of you commented on The Warmth of Other Suns, which I still stand by. It's, I think, a must read for everyone. So Wilkerson followed that book up with this one, and I am 135 pages in to this hardcover edition, and I have to say I'm not loving it. I still think that, of the two books, if you were interested to learn more about racism or African American history in the US, or really just North America in general, Warmth of the Other Suns is the definitive book I would go with. In Caste, I really feel like there is a lot of rambling, and I'm being totally honest. I don't really like it. I'm not sure if I'm going to finish it. It's one of those books. She tries to make a whole subject about caste, and I'm in the part where, after giving some context and definitions, or attempting to define the terms, she starts talking about 8 pillars of caste, and I'm on pillar number 2. I just really feel like this whole thing could have been shortened down to a 100-page book instead of being so disseminated into a 400-page situation. And, outside of the context of caste within the United States, applying to the the African Americans. She also starts talking about Nazism in Germany and also the caste system in India, but those two are slightly less explored, although frequently brought back and mentioned with some more political and historical context than I think the average person would really know or be aware of. So there is still learning and new contexts and historical figures that are interesting, and see how things have developed in those other cultures and contexts. But again, it's very scattered, so it's hard for me to just isolate the parts where I really want to know more about, versus there is just a lot of wordiness. I think this would really sound well as a lecture. If somebody was listening this as an audiobook, I think the effect would be much greater. The difference being, I'm sitting here reading this with a pen in my hand, and I feel like I'm underlining the same sentence rewritten in every 10 pages or so. So value-wise, go with warmth. And yeah, this is the first kind of, I think, negative-ish review of the year, but here it is. The last book that I wanted to mention briefly, and one that I am immensely enjoying but find challenging right now, is Diaries by Kafka. And I will talk about this more in a separate video when and if I finish this is crazy roller coaster of a book. Thanks so much for listening, and I hope you guys are having wonderful reading adventures as well. Have a good week ahead. Bye.